This is HR in Review, a podcast dedicated to HR thought leadership, actionable advice, and all the latest developments in human resource management.
Hi, and welcome back to HR in Review. On this episode, we discuss the future of remote and hybrid work, the feasibility of a 4-day working week, and also whether employers have the right to mandate their workers to fully return back to the office after spending so long working from home since the pandemic. My first guest is Andi Britt, who leads IBM's UKI Talent Transformation Practice. I'm then joined by Désirée Pascual, Chief People Experience Officer at Headspace Health, where we discuss the all-important wellbeing aspect of both remote working and returning back to the office. My last guest is Jane Christopher, who's part of the senior leadership team at Citrix. Hi Andi, thank you so much for joining me on today's podcast.
Great, Emilio. It's wonderful to be with you today.
Cool. So today we're going to be talking about the future of hybrid and remote working and the transition back into the office post-lockdowns. With many organisations implementing hybrid and remote working models even post-pandemic, employers and employees now have different requirements and needs from their office spaces. With employers still recognising the benefits of being in an office, flexibility has become a key priority. So, first of all, why do you think this topic is now an issue for organisations in the public and private sector?
Well, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic was a major disruptive event for businesses, across public and private sector. And certainly in most modern economies, obviously the UK included, organisations are having to adjust to the economic realities of the post-pandemic world. And it's worth remembering that the pandemic was a rapid and forced transformation. So all organisations had to react almost overnight and switch to a new way of working, or suspend operations and furlough their workers. And as a result, it forced them to adopt a fully remote way of working. So virtual working, became the only way to continue operations and keep your employees safe or compliant with travel bans or work from home mandates. And so that in essence was it. Remote working became the default and the only way of working. And so post pandemic, now the travel bans are lifted, businesses are trying to work out, well, what do we do now? Do we stick to the remote model, go back to where we were before, or do we come up with some hybrid model that, meets the needs of the business, the expectations of our customers, and the wishes of our employees?
Exactly. So, over the past 2 years, what do you think this has actually taught us about how work gets done then?
Well, I think it's actually challenged some of our understanding or idea of the rules of work and workplace productivity. In many cases, some of those things we believe to be true were not actually universally true, or perhaps were less black and white. For example, we used to say, the office is the place where you're most productive. Or we'd say, only face-to-face engagement is going to drive the commitment or the change or the ownership we need to move forward. We often used to say in my business, you have to be in the room to seal the deal, or you need to be in person to build trust. Now, I think we've learned that actually these things aren't always true. Work and business can continue virtually. And so, we've had to learn how to conduct and get the most out of online meetings. Some might say we've actually become a lot more productive as we've stripped out, travel and commuting time. So, we've learned how to work remotely, run online meetings, participate in virtual training, and still maintain productivity. And of course, you could argue we've all learnt where the mute and the camera button is on our PC.
Exactly. So, moving on to those who are returning to the office then, with the rising cost of living crisis in full swing, many employees feel that they actually can't even afford to return to the office 5 days a week, right? So, whilst there might be an argument that organisations can mandate their employees to return to the office, maybe a more important question is perhaps, should organisations be able to mandate their employees to return? There are numerous benefits surrounding remote and hybrid working. But even from a psychological perspective, it seems perhaps a little unfair to make this sudden switch.
Yeah, and this has been a particular prominent topic in the media in the UK, where our Prime Minister and members of the Cabinet were actively advocating for members of the civil service to return to
Yes.
the office. And they were even suggesting, I think, publishing league tables or of attendance to challenge government departments or individuals about how much time they needed to be back in the office. Now, in practice, on the mandate question, I think it's going to be difficult for employers to enforce this. I mean, for legal reasons, unless you can clearly demonstrate in law that the work cannot reasonably or effectively be conducted remotely, then I think it's going to be difficult to mandate it. Other than for some obvious customer-facing rules, such as in the retail industry or the travel industry, I think for many businesses, it's going to be difficult to argue that a person's role demands them being in the office if that role has been conducted, remotely now for over 2 years. So for legal reasons, but I also think it's going to be difficult for employers to mandate a return to work for reputational reasons. I mean, no large organization wants to be seen forcing its employees to do anything, particularly when there's been such a focus on issues like mental health and well-being. I think few employers will want to issue, a back to office mandate that might be seen by some as detrimental to people's mental health. So that's why I think the consensus among business leaders is much more towards persuasion rather than mandate. And the way that I've heard many business leaders, and particularly CHROs or HR leaders, address this problem is to pose the question: how can we entice people back into the office? Or how do we make the office a place where our people feel they can get their best work done, or where they'll find the best support, coaching, or development for their careers? I mean, in short, I think business leaders are trying to think through, how do we make the workplace environment buzz again so that our employees will want to return to the office? And I think this way of thinking is important because I think we're experiencing a shift in societal attitudes to working from the office. I think employees now expect, or indeed demand, the freedom to work from home as well as work in the office. And some commentators are seeing this as a power shift to the employee. And start of this year, IBM conducted some research and we asked employees their views. What do you think? And when we asked them the question about, if you were given the choice, what would you do? We found that roughly 2/3 would prefer to either work from home full time or do a balance of working from home and working in the office. And then we also found out that about 1/3 of employees had already decided to switch employers. And the main reason for doing so was that their employers didn't offer sufficient flexibility in their work schedule or location. So that's why I think this issue, the flexibility around remote or hybrid working, is going to become much more important, particularly in the market we're in at the moment, which is a supplier-driven market, so a highly competitive market for talent. So I think firms are going to choose to persuade rather than mandate.
Exactly. So, I guess moving on to what hybrid or remote working looks like in the future, what sort of advice would you give to firms as they map out their own policies and guidance on work location?
Well, the first thing that we would say to our clients and our organizations that we serve at IBM is you need to meet employees in the middle. Given that, employees do value the time and cost savings of working from home, and that they want more flexibility, we think organizations need to, recognize that has to be part of their employee value proposition, what they offer to clients. They can't just push everyone back into the office. So offer flexibility. The second thing we'd advise organizations do is to structure the hybrid model, or define what hybrid working means for your organization. So you need to redefine what coming into the office to work actually means. So in future, employees are going to be far more intentional as to when and why they come into the office. So you don't just come into the office to work, you come into collaborate on a project, or you come in to explore and innovate around a specific problem or task. You come in for a team meeting or project review. You don't just come in to work an available hot desk or to sit in a cubicle.
Yes. So, if you think that, you're kind of changing the way you're coming or why you're going into the office, do you think that the actual landscape of what workplaces look like will change itself then?
Yes, I think workplaces are going to have to be reconfigured so that they can enable people to, collaborate, innovate, and plan all the things that physical location encourages. They can do that better in the offices. Workplaces are going to have to be worth the commute. So, they have to be great working environments. I think companies will have to make more imaginative use of their existing spaces. So I think we're going to move away from the traditional office, which is sort of, open plan and cubicles. And instead, you're going to have a variety of meeting areas, creative spaces, quiet rooms, discussion areas, breakout cubicles, show and tell demo environments. That's all going to be part of the modern office. And of course, because people are coming into the office less, potentially you can use your existing space much more creatively. And of course, with all that, you're going to need some smarter technology that enables remote employees to participate as fully as those in the room.
So I guess just two more questions for you before we wrap up for today, which we ask all our guests on the HR Review podcasts. Firstly, if you could pass on one crucial lesson you've learned in your HR career in 1 minute or less, what would be your top tip for other HR pros?
So HR professionals are always accused of not understanding the business or not being close enough to the strategy of the organization. So the first thing I would say, if you're an HR professional, understand how your business makes money. How is it that you generate revenue, sales, generate profit? And make sure that everything that you do in HR has a direct link or connection to that source of revenue generation and profit generation for the firm.
Absolutely, yeah. Lastly, then, what is the single biggest change you think will happen in HR over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that artificial intelligence and automation will not only strip out administrative work from the role of the HR professional. I think it's going to make us more intelligent in our decision making. It's going to give us greater insights into the people to hire, who we need to train, and how we develop and progress our people. So artificial intelligence and automation, I think, is going to create a new way of doing HR. And as HR professionals, we need to be prepared for it and need to reimagine HR with those exponential technologies to assist us.
Yeah. Great. Well, that leaves me to say, Andi, lovely to chat to you today. Thanks very much for being my guest.
Follow us on Twitter at HR Review or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook.
So, hi Des, thank you so very much for joining me today. I'm super excited to have you here on the podcast.
And likewise, thank you for having me.
No worries. So, today we're going to be talking about the future of hybrid and remote working and the transition back into the office post-lockdown. So today, I'll just, maybe you'd like to briefly outline Headspace's report called Workforce Attitudes Towards Mental Health and what it's focused on.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. Our Workforce Attitudes report is a report that we run annually. And as a mental health and wellness solutions provider, we know that there's not only a huge need, but also a huge appetite among our workforce for mental and emotional well-being support. The goal of our survey year over year is to really dig in and understand the current experiences, challenges, and trends in emotional and mental health in our workforces, straight from employees and CEOs across various industries in the US. And this year, our report surveyed 5,400 employees and 506 CEOs across the United States, the UK, Australia, and Germany.
Oh, wow. Sounds super interesting. So obviously, most organizations now are asking their employees to return back into the office full time, sometimes maybe hybrid. But at the moment, with the rising cost of living in full swing, many workers fear that they simply, can't afford to commute to the office 5 days a week. What do you think employers should or can be doing to tackle this financial well-being issue?
Yeah, the hybrid culture, workplace culture, is something that we've seen emerge throughout the pandemic. And um, as you stated, it was a unexpected relief in many ways, including financial relief. For many, working remotely has been just a boon for their mental health. It eliminated a lot of the stressors that came with a more traditional model of work, such as the stress of commuting, the cost of commuting, the pressure of putting in more time in the office to meet deadlines. People now had more flexibility to structure their workday in a way that also spoke to some of the needs that they may have at home in the context of their lives and their families. And all of those things allowed employees to explore more opportunities to improve their health and wellness because of this new flexibility. At Headspace Health, also better health outcomes.
Do you think, could employers should play a bigger role in ensuring that their employees are well supported in these types of situations?
I love that question. And I think the answer is yes. As employers, we have to rethink the way we do business. One thing that I think is apparent to all of us who went through this time of complete isolation during some stretches due to the pandemic was that collectively we found ourselves spending much more time each day in virtual meetings, on chats and messages and on emails. Collectively, this constant technological connection uh, can be overwhelming, and it leads directly to burnout. And we've seen that across industries. So I think, if I were to give you a couple of bullet points of what I think employers might pay attention to, is one, establish expectations for the way communication tools are used. They can help improve the way information is shared, but they can also be very distracting when they're not used intentionally. Additionally, I think it's really, really important for leaders and for managers to clearly define goals, establishing a regular cadence, to review them, to give and receive feedback. All of that in a hybrid culture bolsters feelings of trust and inclusion, and it helps managers adjust priorities and inspires employees to produce their best work. Prioritization is also something, making sure priorities are clearly defined and understood by teams. Those things help stay everyone aligned in a hybrid work environment. I also think the other piece, and I may be prefacing one of your questions here, Amelia, is that it's crucial to keep a level playing field between remote and on-site employees and teams.
But, just going back a little bit to what you were saying on distraction and prioritization and goal settings. I know myself, I actually work remotely myself, and I do these things myself as well. So how do you think, goal setting and prioritization that might feed into discussions about productivity? Because, working remotely, I think there are so many more distractions going on around you, right?
Yes and no. There are distractions going on around you, as some people, depending on their living situations and their from home work setups. There may be some distractions. However, what it also does it allows employees to manage those distractions and, set aside blocks of time to tend to either work meetings, deep focused thinking blocks. We call them focus time. And then block out other parts of the day to tend to things that may be going on around the home, and then being really explicit about what those needs are in collaboration with their managers and their teams. But what I've seen, when that is done well, it doesn't necessarily mean that productivity drops. Because people may be in their home environment. I think I've seen quite the opposite, that productivity can go up as a result of that flexibility. As you mentioned initially in our conversation, we talked about, time spent commuting. All of that is now time that can be reallocated, though. To your question, I think we have to be really intentional about how we do that. Establish core meeting hours is one way to do that, to make sure that people arrange their schedules such that they're available at those times. Things like that can be really helpful.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, moving on to maybe more remote working, away from hybrid a little bit. One of the main advantages of remote working is perhaps that more wider, disparate talent pools become available, right, as recruiting nationally or even internationally becomes a feasible option. Do you think that giving employees a chance to work remotely is a long-term approach to combat the ongoing current skills shortage?
Very brief and concise answer, yes, I do. To get really good at remote working infinitely widens our talent pools. It also, from a perspective of diversity, equity, inclusion, and providing opportunities, provides opportunities for people who may live in remote or rural areas that otherwise wouldn't be available to contribute to our organizations to do so.
Yes, because in the UK we're talking about the London brain drain, and I'm thinking that perhaps the effects of the pandemic and the feasibility of remote working will maybe even put a stop to this London brain drain. But still talking about recruitment, I think recruiting in this new age where hybrid and remote working are definitely more popular. Do you think recruitment methods might need to change in this new age in any way?
Absolutely, Amelia. I think, and I don't know that they need to fundamentally change, but we certainly need to adjust some of our recruiting practices. One of the things that I think is really important for talent acquisition professionals is to find a way to assess and really dig in with a candidate on remote working practices and what that may look like, because quite frankly, not everybody is comfortable operating in that model. There are also some industries that do not lend themselves to remote work. People who work at the front lines, either in the medical profession or the hospitality industries. That aside, in industries that may lend themselves to remote work, but and I'm thinking about designers, highly creative folks who are also highly collaborative, to just bring some discernment into the process to see, is this a person that is a candidate for a fully remote role, or is this a role that lends itself to a fully remote role, or is this a role that is better suited for a hybrid role, or an in-person role if hybrid work isn't available, because of the nature of the job.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to ask you actually about, the different sectors and how different roles and different job sectors entirely might lend themselves to, hybrid or even remote working. But, for those types of roles that are suited for hybrid and remote working, obviously, now we're living in such a different age. Do you think or expect even hybrid working to feature prominently in the long run, or do you think it's going to kind of fizzle out as we exit post-pandemic?
I believe that let me put it this way. I think that hybrid work is here to stay. I also think that for those who set up this remote working environment intentionally and skillfully, that remote work is here to stay as well. Again, for all of the reasons that we discussed. One, it provides more flexibility to the employee. It widens the talent pool. And, we often talk about the return to normal. We see that terminology everywhere. And so my comment there is, what normal are we talking about? We are, and we have throughout the last 2.5, 3 years, redefined what normal looks like. And there is no return to the pre-pandemic normal, because we've figured out during the pandemic that these different ways of working actually yield substantially similar results. And in some industries, we've actually seen productivity rise as a result of the additional flexibility that we have provided people. So are those concepts here to stay? My prediction is yes, absolutely. Do we have to redefine how we execute against these new workplace environments as HR leaders? Yes, absolutely.
So, ending on that positive note, I guess, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was really great to have you on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great talking to you today.
Great, thank you.
If you have any comments on the HR in Review podcast, would like to suggest a topic or speaker, or provide other feedback, you can contact us using the email podcast@hrreview.co.uk. We look forward to hearing from you.
So, the whole concept surrounding employee experience has really gained traction since working styles changed because of the pandemic. What do you think some expectations are that employees now have of their employer, now that they maybe didn't have before the pandemic? And how could we possibly balance these employer and employee expectations?
Okay, well, quite big questions, but I'll probably start with the most important. I think since the pandemic, definitely employees from many sectors, many industries are looking for much more flexibility, but flexibility that's led with trust from their employers. The research actually on the Citrix papers has shown that actually 70% want the experience since the pandemic to really show leadership, which is led with empathy. So I think alongside that flexibility and trust, it's also empathy that's much more critical to us. I think the balance for employees and employers is employers need to focus much more now on being outcome-based. So what are the outcomes that their employees are achieving? How do they measure them? And really to shift away from this, about presenteeism, the hours people are in an office or working. And I think that would then obviously complement the empathy and the well-being of our employers. From the research we've done recently, 28%, which is, I think a lot higher than it would have been a couple of years ago, are viewing flexibility as more important than actually salary and the package they have with roles that they're picking to stay at or move to. So I think big answer, but I think since the pandemic, we have a bigger role to play as employers. And we have to be really realistic that employees are looking for work to complement their lives much more. And I think before the pandemic, I'd say work was kind of the centre point, and we fitted all the personal, private, hobbies, needs, etc. around work. And that's shifted because people have learned that they can work differently and be still effective and get some really good outcomes.
So is that moving on then? What do you think about this concept of the 4-day working week? There's one currently being trialled across, I think it's 70 UK companies. Do you think it's a viable way of, not only integrating workers back into the office, but also perhaps, a permanent way of working this 4-day week?
I think it's a huge milestone. So I've been reading a lot about it actually on the web as well and the research. I think it could be. I think first acknowledging 4-day week wouldn't maybe work for every industry. If you're more service-led hospitals, but in areas where, it could work, I think it's a great step forward. Again, going back to the point I said before, it would help attract and retain talent, but also we know the 4-day week, and there has been more smaller research in the past, but it can help in terms of better well-being, much more improvement in terms of their outcomes and focus. That's a lot of the research is showing us, that people are more focused if they're doing the 4-day week, and more connected to the company. They feel more loyal. It's giving them something more in return, and it's moving away from more of that traditional, Monday to Friday 9 till 5:30 work, which again is a motivation for employees, and you find that they give back more to the companies. And some of the research we've seen on that is from the Citrix research, I think it was 76% of the respondents globally said they would work a 4-day week. Obviously, they'd like to maintain their salaries still. Yes. But to overlay that, 71%, plan to work in the office only between 1 and 4 days a week. That's 3/4 don't want to go back to an office space full time.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time for HR precisely because of how much is changing. But thank you so much, Jane, for coming on. It's been really great having you on.
Oh, thank you, and I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
The HR in Review podcast is brought to you by hrreview.co.uk. hrreview.co.uk is a website dedicated to human resources and related professionals. News items are posted daily, together with analysis looking in depth at topical HR issues. You can sign up for our range of specialist newsletters at hrreview.co.uk/sign-up, and follow us on Twitter at hrreview, or join us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you for listening.